My relatives thought they had already won. They thought I was too weak, too poor, and too sentimental to fight them. They were wrong. It all began 6 months ago, the day after my father's funeral. I was sitting in the old family home, the house where I had grown up, surrounded by memories of warmth, laughter, and Sunday dinners. The air still smelt faintly of my mother's apple pie, though she had been gone for years. My father had passed quietly in his sleep at the age of 76, leaving behind this house, a modest savings account, and a small piece of farmland just outside town. To me, these weren't just assets. They were the legacy of generations. They were home. Before I continue, I want you to subscribe to this channel. We're going to 1,000 subscribers. I'd really appreciate it. Now, back to the story. That was the day my Uncle Richard and my cousins arrived with smiles too wide and words too slick. Richard was my father's younger brother, a man who had always been more interested in money than in family. He sat down at the kitchen table across from me, slapped the folder onto the wood, and leaned back with a smug grin. "Let's keep this simple, Daniel," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "You don't have the means to maintain this place. The property taxes alone will eat you alive. My boys and I have already spoken to a buyer. We'll sell the house, split the money, and everyone walks away happy." I didn't open the folder. I didn't need to. His intentions were written all over his face. My cousins, Greg and Anthony, stood behind him like thugs in cheap suits. They weren't grieving. They weren't remembering the man who had raised me, who had fixed their bikes, who had given them holiday gifts when their own father couldn't be bothered. No, they were circling like vultures, waiting to strip the flesh from the bones of my family's legacy. When I didn't respond, Richard continued. "You've always been a dreamer, Danny, a sentimental fool. But this is real life. Be smart for once. Sign the papers. You'll get your share, and you won't have to deal with the burden of upkeep. What do you say?" I looked at him, my face a mask of resignation, and spoke the 2 words he expected to hear. "You're right." The relief on his face was immediate. He thought he had me. The humble, broke nephew wasn't going to fight. He stood up, smoothed his jacket, and said, "Good. I'll have the lawyer send over the official documents. Just sign and we'll be done." Then he left, his sons trailing behind him. Here's what Richard knew. He knew I was a man of simple means, a high school teacher, with no big savings account, no lawyer on retainer. He knew I didn't have tens of thousands of dollars to throw into a legal battle. And he also knew I had an older sister, Catherine. What he didn't know, or rather what he thought was irrelevant, was that Catherine and I hadn't spoken in nearly 8 years. Catherine wasn't just my sister. She was one of the most ruthless estate attorneys in the state, a shark in a designer suit whose reputation made other lawyers nervous. But she and I had fallen out after our mother died. I had wanted to keep the house, to preserve it, as a memory, a gathering place for the family. Catherine, ever the pragmatic, wanted to sell it and split the cash. Our argument had been bitter, brutal, and final. We hadn't spoken since. Richard knew this. He had seen the rift, heard the shouting match that ended our relationship. He was banking on the fact that my greatest potential ally was a dead one. In his calculations, I was alone. For 3 days after his visit, I was in a dark place. He wasn't wrong about one thing. I couldn't afford to fight him. The thought of losing the house, the farm, the savings my parents had worked their entire life to protect, it was suffocating. I barely slept. I barely ate. I just sat in that old house, surrounded by photographs and ghosts, feeling helpless. On the 4th day, I hit rock bottom. And from there was nowhere to go but up. I swallowed every ounce of pride that had kept me from picking up the phone for 8 years. With shaking hands, I found Catherine's private number. My heart pounded as I dialed, half expecting it to go straight to voicemail, half praying she wouldn't even answer. But after 2 rings, a familiar voice answered. Cold, sharp, professional. "This is Catherine." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat closed, my tongue felt heavy, but finally I forced the words out. "It's me, Daniel." There was silence on the other end. Long,
Heavy silence. I thought she was going to hang up. Finally, she spoke. Danny? The old nickname sounded strange after so many years. What's wrong? And then it all came pouring out. I told her about Richard, about the folder, about his threats. I told her about my fear of losing the house, the land, everything my parents had worked their entire lives to protect. I told her about his smug confidence, his declaration that I was too weak, too poor to fight him. For a moment, there was nothing but silence again. Then Catherine's voice changed. The ice melted, replaced with steel. It was the sound of a protective older sister. It was the sound of a predator sharpening her claws. He said what? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I repeated his words. Okay, she said. When and where is the first probate hearing? Next Wednesday, County Courthouse. I'll be there, she said. Don't talk to him. Don't sign anything. Don't even look at him. Just show up and let me handle the rest. We hung up. I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. Richard thought he had disarmed me. He had no idea he just handed me a nuclear weapon. The morning of the hearing was cold and gray, with rain threatening overhead. It felt like the sky itself was mourning. I walked into the courthouse alone, looking every bit the part of the defeated man Richard expected me to be. I was wearing my only suit, one reserved for weddings and funerals. It felt like both. Richard was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table with Greg and Anthony flanking him. He looked confident, smug, like a man about to claim his prize. His lawyer, a balding man in an ill-fitting suit, leaned over and whispered something that made them all chuckle. When Richard saw me, he smirked. Didn't think you'd even show up, Danny. Ready to sign away your inheritance today? I didn't respond. I just walked to the defendant's table, sat down, and placed an old leather folder on the desk in front of me. My hands were shaking, but I kept my face blank. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, entered and took her seat. This is the matter of Sterling Estate. Are both parties present and represented? Richard's lawyer stood. Yes, Your Honor. Alan Pierce representing the plaintiff, Richard Sterling and family. The judge's eyes shifted to me. And you, Mr. Sterling? Before I could open my mouth, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding crash. Every head turned. Walking down the aisle was my sister, Catherine Sterling. She wasn't just wearing the suit. She was wearing armor. Midnight black, tailored to perfection, radiating authority. She moved like a storm given human form, her briefcase swinging at her side. A ripple of whisper spread through the courtroom as lawyers and clerks recognized her. Catherine Sterling. The name alone carried weight. She didn't glance at anyone else. Her eyes were locked on me. She walked straight to my table, placed a firm hand on my shoulder, and squeezed gently. Then she set her gleaming briefcase on the desk with a solid, definitive click. The sound echoed in the silent room. I looked over at Richard. His smug grin had vanished. His jaw hung slack. His eyes were wide, filled with disbelief and fear. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost walk into the room. His lawyer looked worse. The color drained from his face. He recognized her instantly, and he knew exactly what her presence meant. Catherine leaned close to me, her voice low enough for only me to hear. Sorry I'm late, little brother, she whispered. A hint of a smile played at the corner of her lips. Then she straightened, her expression all business. She looked at the judge and spoke in a commanding baritone that filled the room. Catherine Sterling, Your Honor, representing the defendant, Mr. Daniel Sterling. The judge's eyebrows shot up. She knew the name. Everyone did. Then Catherine turned her gaze slowly, deliberately, toward Richard. She looked at him, then at his trembling lawyer, and gave them a cold, predatory smile. My apologies for the delay, she said, her voice dripping with mock politeness. Then she delivered the line that shattered Richard's entire world. He doesn't have to afford me. I'm his sister. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. For a moment, no one moved. Then Richard's lawyer tried to recover. He cleared his throat, shuffled his papers, and said, "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We weren't informed that Mr. Sterling would be represented by outside counsel." But the judge raised her hand, cutting him off. "She doesn't need to inform you. Miss Sterling is admitted to the bar in this state, and she has every right to represent her brother. Now sit down." Richard's lawyer obeyed, but his face was already slick with sweat. Catherine opened her briefcase and calmly pulled out a thick stack of documents. Every move she made was deliberate, precise, like a predator toying with its prey. She slid the papers across the desk toward me. I didn't even need to look at them. She had prepared everything. Then she stood, buttoned her jacket, and addressed the court. "Your Honor, before we proceed with the plaintiff's claim, I'd like to submit evidence that Mr. Richard Sterling has been misrepresenting both his intentions and his legal standing regarding the estate." Richard stiffened. His face twitched, but he tried to keep calm. The judge frowned. "Go on." Catherine flipped open the first folder. Exhibit A. Financial records showing that Richard Sterling has been attempting to sell the Sterling family property to a development company for over 3 months, well before my client had even been given time to grieve his father's death. This indicates premeditated intent to defraud the rightful heirs of the estate. Gasps rippled through the room. Richard's lawyer scrambled to his feet. "Objection! That's circumstantial." "Sit down," the judge snapped. She didn't even look at him. She opened another folder. Exhibit B. Bank statements. Large deposits made into accounts belonging to both of Richard's sons, Greg and Anthony Sterling, directly following meetings with representatives of the development company. Payments that coincide perfectly with their so-called advice to my client to sell the property. Greg and Anthony shifted uncomfortably, their smug expressions collapsing into nervous frowns. Richard shot them a furious glance, but it was too late. The damage was done. Catherine walked slowly toward the judge's bench, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Your Honor, this is not a case of family members simply disagreeing over an inheritance. This is a conspiracy, a calculated attempt to manipulate and pressure my client into relinquishing his rightful share of the estate through lies, intimidation, and financial coercion. And I intend to prove it." The judge leaned back, her eyes narrowing as she studied Richard. "Mr. Sterling, do you have a response to these allegations?" Richard jumped to his feet, his voice cracking. "Lies! All lies! She's making this up because she's bitter. She's always been jealous of me, jealous of my success. None of this is true." Catherine turned slowly, fixing him with a gaze so sharp it could cut steel. "Is that so, Uncle? Then perhaps you can explain Exhibit C." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out one final document. She held it high so everyone could see. A forged version of my father's will, signed supposedly in the last year of his life, conveniently leaving everything to you, Richard. Only one problem. The signature was proven by handwriting experts to be falsified, and the notary who supposedly validated it, he died 5 years ago. The courtroom erupted. Richard's face drained of all color. His lawyer buried his face in his hands. The judge slammed her gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" When the noise died down, Catherine lowered the document onto the desk with deliberate force. Her voice was calm, cold, final. "This isn't just greed, Your Honor. This is fraud, a crime, and I intend to prove it." Richard stammered, pointing at me like a desperate man drowning. He put her up to this. He's the liar. He's always been." "Enough," the judge thundered. "One more outburst and I'll have you removed from this courtroom in handcuffs." Richard sank back into his chair, broken. His son sat frozen, faces pale, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The judge turned to Catherine. "Miss Sterling, I've seen enough. The evidence is overwhelming. The forged will is inadmissible, and the court will proceed with the original valid will, which leaves the estate equally to Daniel and Catherine Sterling. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation into potential criminal charges against Richard Sterling and his associates. Her gavel struck. Court adjourned. The sound echoed like thunder. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then Richard exploded, slamming his fist against the table. "This isn't over," he shouted, his face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this, Danny, both of you." But the bailiffs were already on him, escorting him and his sons out of the courtroom. Their threats meant nothing now. They were finished. I sat frozen. The weight of months, no, years of fear and bitterness crashing down on me. My chest felt tight. My throat burned. Then Catherine placed her hand on my shoulder again. Firm, steady, familiar. "It's over," she said quietly. "They can't hurt you anymore." I turned to look at her. For the first time in 8 years, I really saw my sister. Not the cold, distant attorney, not the woman I had fought with, but my sister. The girl who had once bandaged my scraped knees, who had stayed up late helping me with homework, who had defended me from bullies on the playground. Tears blurred my vision. My voice cracked. "I'm sorry for everything. For the fight, for not calling, for..." She shook her head. "Don't. None of that matters now. We're family. That's what matters." I broke down right there in the courthouse, sobbing like a child. Catherine pulled me into her arms and held me, strong and unyielding. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Weeks passed. The district attorney filed charges against Richard, Greg, and Anthony for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft. Their reputations were ruined, their finances drained. Justice had finally caught up to them. As for me and Catherine, we rebuilt, slowly, carefully, but honestly. We restored the family home together, repainting walls, fixing broken fences, cleaning the dust of the past from every corner. It wasn't just about preserving the house. It was about healing. One evening, as the sun set over the farmland, I stood on the porch with Catherine at my side. The sky was painted in gold and crimson, just like the sunsets we had watched as children. "You know," I said softly, "Dad would have loved this, seeing us here, together again." Catherine smiled. A real smile, not the razor-edged one she used in court. "Yeah, he would have." We stood in silence for a while, the weight of the past finally lifting. The future stretched out before us, uncertain but bright. My relatives had thought they could take everything from me. They thought I was weak. They thought I was alone. They were wrong, because in the end, I still had the one thing they could never touch: family.